It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. Welcome, podcasters. Let's go around the horn. Say hello and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm
please.
Peter Lawrence.
Hi, I'm Kate Williamson.
Hello there. I'm Jeremy Melhorn.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. And today we're going to talk about stretching. So we've talked about stepping outside your comfort zone. This is more specific, stretching from your primary skill set into something secondary, tertiary, quaternary. I don't know what 5 is.
So not goat yoga. Okay.
So you get an engagement that's in your wheelhouse and it goes great. And then there's another opportunity that's near your wheelhouse. You can get up to speed. Peter, you've done this.
I have done this a couple of times.
Tell us your quick story about one time that you've done this, and then that'll kind of take us in.
Well, I'll give you a sort of my oops, maybe I shouldn't do that. I should know better than to do that. And I think it was a valuable lesson. So I was brought onto a project, and it was a team of us, and I was going to team lead architect kind of person, right? And then it's like, oh, well, and we need you to be a scrum master also. Oh, and also we're not exactly doing, agile totally in this organization. So do all those things, get us up to speed. And I did not have the bandwidth to do all of those things. And I think everybody realized at some point that little too far stretched. And so I snapped back a little bit, dropped my Scrum amateur. We won't call it a master for sure. It was Scrum amateur, and went back to just doing the technical side of things.
So you're not only stretching into new areas, but you're also stretching across too far. You're taking on too much. So you're spreading yourself too thin. So it's stretching. You're basically just a thin membrane.
Learning a new language on the fly, totally doable. Very easy. Doing Scrum Master at the same time, not a plan I ever will repeat again.
Kate, what's your story? Just one example.
Sure. Big one for me was totally self-inflicted. I asked to stretch. I had been a .NET developer, and there was a need for a project manager on the same team. So I volunteered to fulfill that role, as well as continuing with my development responsibilities. And I felt it. I began to feel the pressure coming from both angles, but my team and my leaders were willing to accommodate. So kind of pull back on some of the development work to really focus on the project management side, which is the area that I wanted to move into.
Because when you do that, you kind of have to be a senior person to even approach anybody to take that role on. So you're doing all the hard development, all the key pieces, and and then add this whole other job on.
Yeah. Yes, eventually. And I was able to assign out the development tasks. So eventually I stopped, assigning myself the larger features that were more time consuming. So for the sake of everyone, QA especially.
It's just
Jeremy,
a little late.
What's one time you had to stretch? Because we've all done it. I know you've done it.
On the project delivery side, it's actually quite common. A lot of the times it's expected, especially if I'm on the business analyst side, right? It's a very generic, it means a lot of different things at various organizations, right? So you are brought in to do analysis work, writing user stories, getting requirements, your standard stuff. But then they want to throw QA on top of that, or they want you to supplement Scrum Master because a lot of companies do not think Scrum Master is a full-time job. Let's say, it's just you're facilitating ceremonies. That's they're 15, 30-minute meetings, right? So I find it more common than rare in my world, where they want multiple roles, a similar bill rate, right? They don't need 3 people, where they want the one person to fit all the needs.
That's a great point.
Which I think is personally unfortunate. I mean, it's a lot of work, just like you said, Peter. It's they're different hats. It's different way of thinking in a lot of these roles.
Yeah. Well, and it's a focus shift while you're doing that work. because you're jumping from one to the next.
Exactly.
We're taking off one hat, putting on another. Ran solo on most of my projects, and they varied in size. So the smaller ones, the stretching was easier and kind of expected. You're building one thing.
Right.
And they know what it is. And so it's not very difficult to stretch. But being a master configurator of things and not really a developer that creates whatever you want from scratch, I kind of had to stretch into kind of a BA role and be in the room when requirements were being discussed, because that was the best time to try to get them to fit into the capabilities of the platform. And it's like, well, how important is this to you? How much time is it going to save? And if we did it a little differently, is that going to work for you? The way you're describing it is not quite going to do it. So if I wasn't in those meetings and stretching into those areas and sometimes stepping on some toes, I couldn't do that. And then it was another meeting. And further, I get this, the Christmas morning, the dream requirements and all that stuff. Then I'd have to go, it's like, well, if we do this, I need to bring in a developer.
Yeah.
We need to make this, we need to code this to make this work this way. But then other times, the real stretch was, one of my projects was we don't have anybody else to dig into this area. And I'm like, I'm not, that is not in my wheelhouse.
I don't have a shovel.
And I mean, it was, I don't want to go into it that far.
So Jeremy, your comment about BA also doing QA, and I was just thinking from a developer standpoint, that almost seems totally unfair, because not only are you writing the requirements for the task, but then testing that the task requirements that you wrote.
Exactly.
And so it's almost kind of like, yeah.
Right. It's almost a type of cheating and just passing things without really truly testing. Is what the business partner asked for, is it really working in the way in which they intended? It's working in how we wrote what we want.
How you thought it should. Yeah.
Exactly. It functionally works the way it was described. It's the unfortunate part of that is such a common thing. It's I like to bring it up in interviews and say, have you done QA? I'm like, yes, I've tested. Pretty much everybody has, either whether you want to or not. I mean, developers, you do the unit testing on your code. There is some flavor, but it's an art to truly quality test and the gotchas and the other scenarios that you don't think of.
Right.
And it's an unfortunate piece, because I think it can be a very large misc, and it can create a lot of turmoil and chaos when it's not done right. Because
I think the problem with lumping QA in with other roles is there's kind of a natural bias in those roles. So like when a developer QAs their own stuff,
I'm the worst QA person in the entire planet.
Like I know how I intend this to be used. Mm-hmm. I'm going to use it that way. It works fine. We're good.
It always works how I coded it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So unit testing passes, QA passes, and then you roll it out. This is why I love QAs that are out to get me.
Yeah.
Like, we're out to destroy your work and do crazy things. I'm going to put a negative number in here that's 16 characters long. And, it's like, oh, you broke it. Okay. I didn't realize that you could do that. For my, I did the PTO balance rollover stuff, and someone put in a negative number and it gave them 500 hours of PTO revenue sharing. I'm like, okay, I need to fix that.
That's too bad that didn't go out to all of us. I was a little disappointed to learn that.
It's not in production. But that stretching across multiple roles, you're not going to be as effective in each one because of the just natural distraction. And I've always tried to communicate that scenario. I'm not the best one for this. There's going to be some ramp up learning curve. It's going to take some time for me to dig into this. Is that okay? And because there's nobody else. So it's
being
fine.
A consultant, that's a difficult subject. I mean, you want to provide value, right? You want to build that trusting relationship, and that word no can come across, negatively, or it's a tough word to say to our clients when you want to, build their trust and make it a positive experience.
I want to do everything for everybody.
Yeah. Saying no is the title of our next podcast. Because we can go deep. I think, have you been in a position where you have to ask someone else to stretch? Like you're
Yes.
putting that on somebody else to do.
And I think it's helpful when you're having that conversation to explain the reasoning behind whether or not it's a temporary or long-term stretch. Also, reassuring them that they have, support behind them as well to make them as comfortable in that stretch as they can be. Listening to their concerns, of course.
Yeah.
Get them not to say no.
I know, exactly.
Yeah. A hard no on that is like, whoa,
Yeah.
because you have to have flexibility and a willingness to help out and all of that. And so like my hard no was .NET code.
Oh,
I'm
come on,
like,
Kyle.
what's the first thing I said when you were doing my tech interview, Peter?
Something about not coding. Don't ask me any technical questions. 'Cause
If
I'm
you
not gonna
give me
answer
the
'em.
clock problem, I'm
Yep.
walking out.
I'm walking out.
Leaving. Well, it was Fuddruckers, so I'm leaving after I eat.
If I can wake up.
So, talked about stretching into other skill sets, spreading yourself too thin. When there's no area, no one to stretch to, when you have that gap and no one can fill it and they can't, they don't have budget to add headcount. Have you been in that situation?
Yes, for sure.
And then you stretch.
You do. I think we all subconsciously stretch. I mean, just like Kyle and Peter, like you said earlier, when you're in meetings and you're talking about functionality and requirements, you guys are asking questions because you're already solutioning or thinking about what needs to happen. So in our industry, I think everyone is a BA in some way, shape, or form because you're asking the question, right? You're not doing the role, but you're thinking that way, right? And I think we all stretch in some way, shape, or form without even thinking about it.
Yeah, walking into a project, there's always that mystery of what is the work?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are we dealing with? What am I walking into? So kind of being open, kind of what happens and fitting yourself into what is required of you. I think, when I was new at consulting, if I didn't know everything and know how to do everything, I felt like, oh, total loser. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Imposter. It's like, no, the consultants walking in and getting their feet under them. One thing I like about, SDG is the customer's hiring consultant and SDG.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The SDG whole support system is behind that consultant. So you've got your communities and groups and experienced people. And, as we've grown, there's a lot more of them with a lot broader skill set. So that support system gets better and better.
Right.
And so just throwing a question out, we hire good people, decent folk that care. So you throw a question out and it's a race for people to give you an answer.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to get a faster answer is to put a question out there with the wrong answer with it. So people want to correct you. That's even faster.
I think it's a key part of our success as a company is dedication and the passion we all have for the industry. And it's what garners us to bring on the great talent that we have.
As a developer, they're going from .NET to Java. You got all the patterns and the techniques and all of that in your wheelhouse.
There's a lot of crossover. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something you could do. You could pull that off.
Yes. If you forced me to take a Java client, and Chad's not here to defend it, but I could do it if I had to. It definitely wouldn't be as fast as somebody like Chad that, knows Java inside out.
Yeah.
And I would not want to start a Java project, with nothing to go on.
Yeah.
Right? Like, hey, just whip up this new thing. Like, no, we've got people for that. It's help out with this one problem. Yeah, that's me. I can do that.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't matter.
Throwing you
whether
into a
it's-
team in progress.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can handle that.
We
but-
need just more heavy lifting on this project.
right, or light lifting for a while.
Yeah. There's, I think, in setting that expectation, there's always going to be ramp up, learning curve, things like that. And so I think adding that into your language when you're speaking with customers is just kind of communicating that as you go. So there's no surprise if when they ask you to stretch to something, like, okay, I think I can pull that off.
I
What
can
do you
help out
do
with that.
What do you do if it's something you absolutely cannot do? How do you handle that?
Well, I rely on my support system within SDG to talk it through and to try to determine alternatives, what they are. Is it really something that I just can't do, and working with the client as well to get a better idea of their need and why they're asking me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
SDG could probably help with that if I couldn't. So really just keeping the communication open across all parties.
Those why questions are very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Helps justify, do we really need to do this? Is this really needed?
Yeah.
In a good sense, not a snarky why.
No, but I mean, having the experience too, right? Like knowing that developers as QA people is probably about the worst possible QA department you'll ever have,
Mm-hmm.
right? Unless it's QA developers doing QA, that's different than normal, or we'll call like developers doing QA on their own. There's times where you try to stretch for some of these things to help the client out or to do things. And then eventually you just get to the point where you're like, no, it's not working. And you kind of snap back, right? I think we've talked about that a little bit, like try to stretch and oops, reached a little too far. And
I spent a week doing JavaScript and then went, okay, this is not this is not something I should be doing. We've got people that could pull this off in an hour, and I have to start from scratch. I mean, I can steal other people's code and change a few.
Right.
And I'm better at it, way better at it now than I used to be. But
everybody gets better every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is when you do stretch, you have to have reasonable expectations for yourself because it's a struggle. There's tension there. You're stretching, remaining limber and then giving yourself that time without beating yourself up because you suck at everything when you start it. You're not good at anything when the first day or the first hour, you don't know anything or you got this big knowledge gap you're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to spend time learning as to get to that level you need to be at.
That's the other conversation you have to have, right? Is you have to talk to whoever's asking you to stretch. If Kate's asking me to stretch into a certain place, then we have that conversation. You said you'd talk about, being there to support me and help me out and things like that. Do you watch that person that you've asked to stretch and look for signs of snapping back?
Yes, of course. And they usually become more and more apparent. You don't have to. But yes, checking in early and often, and just to tell them that you appreciate their stretching as well. That can, acknowledging it, that it's not ideal, can go a long way.
Right. Helps out a lot. And just everybody being on the same page, right? Knowing that, all right, we've got 4 people on a team of 6. Here we go.
Just builds those relationships and makes the team stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the trust. It's in the willingness to know, hey, Peter, we're all here to help and willing to help. It's not a, no, that's not my job type of mentality. It's, we'll do what we can do.
I would literally mop the floor. It was demanded of me. There's no task too small, too big or too small. But it's do you really want me to be doing tech support when should be doing building your intranet and that kind of stuff? Because for me, a lot of times they had existing SharePoint going on and they've had it for a year. And then I go in and it's oh, wow, this guy knows, a lot. He's been doing this for a while. He's got some experience. And then you kind of become the help desk. You inadvertently stretch.
yeah, I got this problem with SharePoint over here. Can you help me out?
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword, right? When people know that you can stretch and have experience or some knowledge in these areas, you could easily be taken advantage of too. And those skills could be used and abused as well. There's another side of that coin.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep on going back to the customer or the client, whomever is asking you to stretch, and letting them know this isn't ideal. What would be great is to have someone really fulfill this role that's meant to do it, because other things are going to suffer. They're changing focus. So just kind of keeping that stream of communication open as well is necessary, or else that pattern will continue and continue and continue.
Well, and Kate, you often come into different roles at different clients, right? So you've been a product owner or a project manager, project manager,
product owner, project manager, scrum master. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you know how to do all of those things, and they're not the same task, right?
No, they're not.
But being asked to do all three of those is like, okay, but I'm going to do 33% of all three of these, not.
Yes. And I have a preference too. So,
right.
There's something that I like more within those. So I'll probably, just focus a bit more on that one thing that I like and not so much on the others. Still get it done, but.
Sure. 50, 25, 25 exactly. Instead of 33, 33, 33.
And it depends on what the team needs too. So,
yeah.
Well, that's true.
Well, I think there's a component of like, what can you stretch into? Going from one giant platform to another, it's like, well, this is just another content management system.
Right.
This is just another this or that. Like, you should be able to go from SharePoint to Salesforce,
piece of cake.
Or LifeRay, which is got Java on the back end. Like, it's just another content management system.
Just
it's
the
like,
exact same stuff, right?
And I've got a head start on understanding, like categorizing and content types and all that kind of stuff. But everything works differently, and you got to work across this broad. It's like, okay, this is not my specialization. This is not the platform I know inside out. And this is a long learning curve because there's a lot to it. But are you going to just say flat out no? Because maybe you're only using a very tiny part of it for the project. So it's like, I'll take it on and then figure out as quickly as I can and try to fail fast, like giving up too soon. It's like, okay, I don't want to go another 2 weeks on this thing when I know it's just not happening for me.
But then you bring in somebody else to help out, right? Or snap back, right? You're like, okay, I tried to stretch and it's not me.
Well, and that's is as you get stuck, it's like you're just handling things one obstacle at a time. So like with, Kate, you're talking about wearing all these hats and doing all this stuff and asking people to stretch, and it's that monitoring that progress and encouraging the person stretching to like raise the flag and say, oh, I need help on this.
As early as possible.
And that's tough because that can get into the pride area.
Well, and as consultants, we try to do everything right. So, and we try to learn on the way. And like sometimes, like you said, Kyle, you'll spend a week doing JavaScript that you maybe shouldn't have spent that week on. That's a challenge, especially in the consulting field, right? Because you're supposed to be billing productive hours, not just hours, right? You're not being paid to read the newspaper or whatever kids these days read. Maybe Instagram. It's not Facebook.
Instacart. Oh, no, that's shopping.
Yeah,
crazy kids these days.
But so you're trying to do your best, and you've told everybody you've done all the communication, and so everybody understands. But there's still some of that desire on the client side to get the thing that they want out of that task name, and you're doing it.
What's a role that people assume that you're stretching from one role to another? What are some roles that people assume you can just stretch into? It's like, well, no, actually, That's a very different thing. Like development to QA is not a good path.
But it's often looked as, well, you know how to develop and you know how to use the software that you're developing, so you ought to be able to test it, right? And yes, that makes sense. I also know how to use the software the right way, and I know how to not make mistakes when I'm entering data and doing bad things like that. So I don't do it. I try to, guess some negative numbers or something like that. But even so, it's not the same. It's not even close to the same.
No, like for me, it's in the SharePoint world. It used to be like going into development.
Right.
Like you can do farm level solutions in .NET because you can do all the front end stuff. You're the SharePoint guy, and I like seeing that on requirements for a role. You have to know all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody they were going to bring in to do anything in SharePoint needed to have 12 years of .NET experience. It's like, well, there won't be any .NET on this. Or I'm not going to like stretch into that because that's not, my wheelhouse. My brain doesn't work that way.
And we don't want this project to take 2 years while Kyle goes off and learns .NET and then comes back.
I think I could learn it. I think I'm capable of learning it. But so as a consultant, always have the projects that are in your wheelhouse you love coming through the pipeline. There's always that conundrum of the pipeline of availability and the pipeline of projects and fitting the two in. So really, it's like, well, I don't want to just sit here waiting and waiting and waiting. And there's this stretch project they're asking me about.
Mm-hmm.
I found that in a few cases where I really said I was resisting, and I'm like, no, that's not me. That's not me. When I gave it a shot, it was like, oh, I can do this. Like I didn't know I could stretch into it. And I didn't know exactly what the project was. What they're asking for isn't always phrased in a way that's going to click with what you think they're asking for.
Completely agree.
Having that willingness to dip a toe in that pond. So have you had that happen, Kate or Jeremy, where it's like, well, I'm going to stretch because this is what's available. It does, whether you stretch because you want to get off the bench and this is what's available, or you stretch because you want to learn new things and you have curiosity. It really doesn't matter as long as you can fill that role and you communicate like what it's going to take for you to do it.
I've more stretched within an engagement more so than taking an engagement because it was a stretch.
Right.
I've gotten more technical, and in areas where I filled a gap and stretched that way is, I think, more of my past experience of what I've done versus saying, hey, I'm going to sign up for this engagement because I know it's a stretch from the get-go.
Part of being a consultant, at least for me, is to get to have the opportunities to stretch. I want to experience all these different roles. It might be painful sometimes, but we can get past that. So that's one thing that I really like about consulting is that you just, in time, you'll be in a number of roles and doing a number of different responsibilities that you wouldn't necessarily have at a singular company.
That's really true, because I know that I'm not doing the same development that I was doing 16 years ago when I started at SDG. A whole different thing. I know, and I've gotten the opportunity to stretch along the way, and part of those opportunities come when the project is small enough, right? It's a lot easier to stretch on something. If you're a one-person band or what have you, it's a lot easier to stretch into those spaces and do the project management because you know exactly what you're doing as a developer because you're the developer,
exactly.
Right? And so but you're not keeping track of 15 developers at the same time, like Kate and Jeremy and you guys are keeping track of on your projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that within the engagement, sometimes you have like time. Sometimes it's like I can do more. So reaching out, looking for ways of filling that, like, okay, give me more stuff. What else can I do? What else can I help with? And being on the lookout for that stuff, being hungry for it, not just waiting for them to bring it to you and sitting there and well, I'm waiting for these requirements to come in. I'm done with all this stuff and I can't really do anything else until this happens. So I'm just going to sit here and twiddle my thumbs. It's like, well, no, like reach out, find something. They're going to, find a team member. Like, is there anything I can do to help you out? And like finding ways of stretching. Like you're saying, Kate, wanting that toolbox to grow and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Going from one role to the other helps you understand that role better. Like, it kind of all comes back to Dungeons and Dragons. You got the DM running the game, and you got the players. And, I got back into it starting at the DM side, and I'm like, I want to be a player. I need to see things from that perspective so that I'll be better as a DM.
That's all right. It all comes back to Dungeons and Dragons. You're right, Kyle. That's all work is basically a subset of Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah. You're going where the action is, and you're on your journey, your campaign as a team working together to get something done. And you're going to have to wear multiple hats on, I think most engagements, you're going to have to wear multiple hats.
100%.
I mean, that's very true as especially, on some smaller engagements. And by smaller, I just mean where you don't have multiple teams and multiple things, right? You're going to have to stretch to fill in any gap that you find. You may start out as you're the tech arc or whatever, but you'll have to do some development. Big surprise.
Yeah.
It's not really, you're not stretching, you're sort of stretching back, because sometimes I'm sure, Kate, if we asked you to stretch back to do some .NET development,
don't want that.
Might be a bit of a stretch, right?
For the greater good, you don't want.
I had an engagement where like I had more I could do. I had room to do more space. And I can do just open tutoring sessions and help sessions that people can just walk into. I'll just be in the room, Mondays, Wednesdays, or Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever, finding creative ways of adding value.
That was Kyle's way of stretching into his current role today.
I am. It's a taffy pull. My current gig, being a full-time consultant for SDG.
Mm-hmm.
When I reach out for support, I have this giant pool of knowledge that I can draw from. That's the only way I can do this job. If I didn't have people I could lean on for stuff, because we have so many platforms and so much going on. So it's like, well, I could stretch into AWS, but Peter just got his cert.
Funny how that works. We have an AWS need and we have an AWS resource. It works out perfect.
Yeah.
Well, and even that started out as a stretch, right? I wasn't exactly, .NET consulting does not lead to AWS solution architecting necessarily. It's not necessarily a clear-cut, easy step progression or anything like that. It was a stretch, and I did it because it looked fun.
Well, there's so many, like all the components of an application running on a server. All of those now have been chunked out into services, and I got to know about compute power. I got storage, I got database, I've got, I got bandwidth, throughput, I've got all this stuff going on, and it's changing all the time. So it is a scramble to keep up and force changes. This is going away. We're shutting this down. This is changing. Yeah, you have to be flexible. You just have to be open.
Hey, does that happen in your universe? PIM or something like that was big a while ago. Do those kinds of things go away now and stretch into different project management styles?
It doesn't go away. I don't think it'll always be there, but SDG's main focus is all within the Scrum and Agile certifications and following those methodologies.
Yeah, I'm just pulling back only acronym I know about project management. So, but that was sort of an old school project management style, right? Or certification that you could do. Often, I mean, even doing Scrum, right? Or or agile is probably a stretch for you at the start.
Oh, definitely. And really, again, talking about flexibility, everything, I don't think I've ever run a purely Scrum team. You're always merging and working with, have some aspects of waterfall. So yeah, you're stretching across and getting comfortable with that, and allowing yourself to do things differently just based on the team and the needs of the client.
I don't see Wall Street asking for the next piece of work that your team is going to produce, right? It's all about quarterly results and very waterfall-y leading, right?
So what roles on the project delivery side of things, are there technologies that you have that change that you have to learn, or is it more just the art of performing that role?
From a business analyst perspective, the technology is always changing. Depends on, whether you're using EDI or however the system integrations work. Everybody does the same thing different ways, right? There's so many technologies, so many ways of sharing data or systems talking to each other. I mean, there's the foundational aspect, but it's how the companies utilize the technology and understanding what's A goes to B and just how it's done. From my perspective, that's what's always changing, is how they integrate the systems. Mm-hmm. What information needs to be collected? Is it a push? Is it a pull? Is it it's all that kind of. So for me, the technology changes quite a bit. There's your common players as well, right? The big hitters that are like to always be prevalent.
Grow into it, right? I mean, EDI used to be everything, and that's I assume it's going away someday, but.
What does EDI stand for? What does EDI stand for again?
Electronic Data Interface.
So
how go ahead, Peter.
No, you're the expert. I'll let you tell the story.
So for instance, say it's in the industry, purchase orders, transferring purchase orders. You place a purchase order, you send it over via EDI to your vendor. And then that's how the whole supply chain logistics happens, right? You transfer purchase orders, sales orders digitally. So your vendor knows what to ship to your distribution center, and then your distribution center knows where to ship, on what truck, at what time, at what quantities, at blah, blah, blah.
So as a BA, how much do you have to know about what they're currently using and what they will be using, what they're moving to, and making them stretch, asking the end users, the people that will be taking this and actually having to use it every day to do their job, how much do you want to have them stretch to use a new system, a new way of doing things? I'll tell you what, I don't know. I don't care how bad your system is. 2 years later, they're going to be really good at using your bad system.
It's tricky, because a lot of the times the end users aren't affected by technology change behind the scenes, right? They still go to the same form, the same screens. It's just data is populated different behind the scenes. So that's where it becomes a balancing act, where I personally shield them from what's going on behind the scenes and just say, you're still going to the same spot, or now you're looking at this field or that screen, but it's more of behind the scenes that changes, and talking to those technical teams responsible for managing that. That's where it becomes a balancing act for me, is shielding the business users, the end users, from the technical changes going on, and just telling them, here's what's changing in your world, and then having a completely different conversation with a technical team to say, here's what's really changed behind it. That's the arena I live in, and I feel like you gotta kind of talk out of both sides of your mouth sometimes.
Yeah, I think, and there was a big industry shift from trying to the end user into the solution instead of fitting the solution to the end user.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, we need to understand them and design this to fit the way they do business.
100% agree.
What they're used to.
But a lot of people don't think that way. That's a struggle out there. They don't think of the end users. They think of what's the quickest and cheapest way to technically solve the problem, and then make the end users make it work, their perspective, to use that cheaper, quicker solution. And at the end of the day, it can turn into be much more expensive in the long run, but yeah, it's a way of thinking. It's stretching organizations to think differently. That's another way of thinking of stretching, right? It's going from waterfall to agile. That's a stretch.
That is an amazing stretch.
It's a mindset. It's culture, stretching the way of thinking. It's beyond just what we do as consultants for a living. It's how do organizations think differently? Because like you said, Kyle, it's, mindsets are shifting on how you think and how you get projects done. It's a very broad topic that can hit multiple industries, multiple roles, and different ways of thinking. It's beyond just what can you do, what do you have experience in, kind of my thought behind it.
It's interesting to see the thinking. I've never thought about waterfall to agile as being some sort of stretch, but rather than they should just do that because that's how that. It's obviously makes the most sense, but
right.
It's a big stretch.
It is from executives, from the budgets. And I mean, you've experienced it's a very, very different way of thinking. And it comes across as risky decisions because of the stereotypes that are out there. Agile's less documentation, or you just go and get things done. But that's not necessarily the case. There's still thought behind it. It's not just, rash decisions being made.
Right.
Yes. But you really need that buy-in from the top in order to make it work and have that trickle down throughout the whole entire organization, or else it is unlikely to succeed.
How do you break it to the execs that there won't be a Gantt chart?
Yeah.
Do they really want to see the Gantt chart?
They just want to know that the light is green.
Where everything included a Gantt chart.
Really, what they find more valuable though is looking at a demo at the end of a sprint and seeing actually, might be not pretty and not the end result, but actually seeing the application that's being built. That's the huge selling point to really get them to stretch into this new mindset.
Mm-hmm. They see progress visually. They see visual representation of work being done, and they eat it up in spades.
Well, and then the vacuum on the other side of that, the waiting for something to happen.
Good old days. Wait a year, we'll have something for you at the end of the year.
And then it's wrong.
It'll probably be right?
And then you're using the Gantt chart as a pacifier. Well, here's this instead. Yeah. Chew on this for a while we're still working on this thing, and you'll see it at the end. There'll be an unveiling. It's getting your hands on stuff right away, seeing progress, feeling like, okay, we're getting something. We're getting some bang for our buck. We're getting something out of this. Things are happening. That's so reassuring.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Agile's so popular, I think.
Yeah, that might be the linchpin. So parting thoughts on stretching. I liked that we got to having, the organization stretching, and I wish we had thought of that sooner, because I think there's a lot more there.
I want to spin it around now.
Yeah.
I think it's a big piece of the puzzle.
I'll just say this, that you should stretch. You should try it. You should have good communication when you're doing it, and be okay with snapping back if you need to, but also recognize that some things are going to take a little longer, and that's okay.
Plus one to that. That's
me too. 100%.
Name of the game there. Yep. You can't beat yourself up. You're not going to know everything. You're not expected to know everything, but you try, right?
Right. Yeah. And I would say, check yourself. Are you rigid? Are you inflexible in some areas?
Mm-hmm.
Pride and ego happen. We've all got egos. We've all got pride, and you want to take on something that you can knock out of the park. Like you want to be a big deal, do a big thing. You don't feel like it, if you're stretching, that you're going to be as big of a deal. And that's kind of where humility, flexibility, if you can get to that point, it's way better. It's way better to be flexible when you're already flexible.
I like it.
That's just genius. Yeah.
Yes.
I feel like I translated English into English.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll shut her down and say goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to have you. Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.